A single father with only a middle school education. I wouldn't want my daughter marrying into that. Get out. My son, Sam, proposed to his girlfriend, Amy. I accompanied him to greet her parents, only to discover her father was the well-known owner of a brand store. Knowing his fiancée came from a distinguished family made Sam nervous. But he confidently answered all of Williams's probing questions. However, the moment Williams learned I only graduated from middle school, he struck Sam across the face. I can't contain my anger at someone who looks down on others because they don't match his family's status. Let's meet again, I said, and Sam, Amy, and I headed to the hospital. On the way, I told her that I might confront Williams about this. After hearing her response, I was more determined than ever. The next day, Williams was shocked to learn who I really am. I'm Tim, and I'm 69 years old. Since my wife passed away, I've been living with my son, Sam. Since retiring, my legs have gotten weaker, and now I can't walk for long periods, so I rely on a wheelchair. At home, I can't move around without Sam's help. He's 28 now, in the prime of his life. So as to not be a burden to him, we hired a housekeeper. But Sam still cares deeply for me, pushing my wheelchair out even on his days off. I'm always silently grateful to him. And then Sam's big moment came. He proposed to his girlfriend, Amy. One night, after coming home from work, Sam's news almost made me drop my tea. "Dad, I proposed to my girlfriend." "Is that so? What did Amy say?" I waited anxiously for Sam's reply. Slowly, Sam formed a circle with both hands. "She said okay, she'll marry me." I'll never forget the look of happiness on his face at that moment. I held back tears of joy and congratulated Sam. "Congratulations, you've grown into a fine man." "Thanks." But Sam's excitement was short-lived, and he suddenly looked downcast. "What's wrong? You got a yes, but you look so down all of a sudden." "It's great that she said yes, but now I have to get her parents' blessing, and I'm really nervous about it." I also felt really nervous when I went to greet my late wife's parents. Her father was quite stubborn, and it took many bows before he finally gave his blessing. And now, Sam is about to go through the same rite of passage as I did. Trying to encourage him, I patted him on the shoulder. I was really nervous when I went to ask for permission to marry. But if you express your feelings honestly, your sincerity will surely come across. I'm not just a doting father when I say that Sam is truly a fine young man. He's serious about his work and even does the housework. He's also popular with the ladies in the neighborhood because he's such a pleasant young man. Okay, it's a bit scary, but I'll give it my best shot. That's the spirit. First, let's drink to your successful proposal. That night, the two of us toasted with our best sake. The marriage introduction was set to take place at a traditional restaurant. Amy chose a restaurant that was accessible in my wheelchair, showing just how considerate she is. Sam definitely has good taste in women. She's a real catch. I'm sure these two will be happy together. Suddenly, I felt an urge to give Sam a gift to prepare him for the marriage proposal. I decided to buy something fitting for a man to boost his courage. So, while he was at work, I went with my hired assistant to a high-end department store. Looking around, I saw a set of bowls being sold as a couple's item. However, I quickly reminded myself that he hadn't yet received the parents' approval. Trying not to jump the gun, I headed to a men's boutique instead. Which one should I choose? I mumbled as I browsed. Being in a wheelchair, I couldn't reach the shelves and had to ask a nearby salesperson for help. "Excuse me, could you help me see something on the top shelf?" However, the salesperson ignored me upon seeing my wheelchair. Thinking he hadn't heard me, I tried again. Then the salesperson said with a sneer, "We don't have anything suitable for someone like you here." I was taken aback by his attitude. Just as I was about to complain, a well-dressed man emerged from the back. The other staff bowed to him, showing he was someone important at the store. He seemed to be in his late 50s, stocky and stout. I approached him, hoping he would correct the salesperson's behavior. "Excuse me, I was treated horribly by your staff." As I was about to explain, the earlier salesperson called out, "Mr. Williams, the president," and hurried over. This man in the suit was not the store manager, but the president of the company. Upon hearing his name and taking a closer look, I recognized him. He was Williams, the head of a major menswear brand that operates stores nationwide. A brand well known throughout Japan. "Well, sir, was there an issue with the staff?" When I explained what happened, Williams looked down at me and asked again. "That staff member treated me with disrespect when I asked for help." I expected Williams to apologize and correct the issue. But to my dismay, he just snorted and laughed. "Ha ha, sir, this is a high-end men's store. If you're dissatisfied, perhaps try somewhere else." What? I was shocked and openly showed my anger. "Can't you see? Our clientele are all affluent. We have nothing suitable for someone as plainly dressed as you." Williams smirked, laughing with the staff. Appalled by the treatment, I left the store in anger. "Forget it, I don't need this place." I knew the brand was popular among celebrities, but this was a bitter experience. I eventually bought a different gift, but the incident left a bad taste in my mouth. I plan to give Sam the gift after a successful marriage proposal meeting. And today, we are on our way to the traditional restaurant where Amy's parents are waiting. Sigh, I'm getting nervous. Sam sighed as he pushed my wheelchair. "Don't worry, Amy's parents are probably nice people." I reassured him multiple times as we approached our destination. Though traditional Japanese restaurants often have mats and cushions, they accommodated me with a room with chairs and a table. Waiting there were Amy and her parents. But the moment I saw her father's face, I involuntarily exclaimed, "Oh, what's wrong, Dad?" "Nothing, it's nothing." The father of the other party turned out to be Mr. Williams, the president from earlier. Indeed, Amy shares his last name, which isn't unusual, so I hadn't thought much of it. When I saw Williams, he looked at me and nodded with a smile. His demeanor was different from our encounter at the store, and I couldn't hide my surprise. "Nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to today," he said, inviting me to sit down. That's when I realized he had forgotten meeting me. To him, I was just another unsuitable customer, not even worth remembering. Realizing he had forgotten, I calmed myself down, remembering that today was about the marriage proposal. However, the thought of Williams becoming Sam's father-in-law didn't bring me joy. Japanese cuisine was served, and as the meal began, I felt awkward while Williams started a conversation. "So, where did you meet my daughter Amy?" "I met Amy through a mutual acquaintance at work, and it was love at first sight for both of us. They dated after work, and their relationship deepened," I added. "Ah, you have a good eye to take a liking to my daughter," Williams chuckled. "I learned about your family after dating for a while and was surprised to find out that my father-in-law is a famous apparel company's president." Ha ha, right. Sam seemed to be getting along well with Williams. I was relieved to see the parents and Sam in a friendly atmosphere. Amy, initially nervous, relaxed as she saw the two men chatting. Then Williams began. "Our family line dates back far beyond the Showa era. And I've always been told by my father not to let our lineage end. It's the duty of the Williams family head." Yes. The mood tensed up, and Sam audibly swallowed. So, I need to determine if you are suitable to be my daughter's husband. Let's see if you have what it takes. Williams gave Sam a sly look. He was smiling, but his words clearly placed us beneath him. I had thought this at the store, but Williams is an arrogant man. He seems to think that all the glory built up by his ancestors is his own doing, even though he's just a high-end brand shop owner. Sitting quietly, Amy whispered a criticism to him. Dad, please choose your words carefully. In an instant, Williams slapped her across the face. It was so sudden that Sam and I couldn't move. What kind of attitude is that towards your father? I will decide who your husband will be. Don't you dare speak out. Amy looked downcast with a bruised cheek. I was shocked. It was too much. Mr. Williams, sir, that was a bit too much. Sam rebuked him immediately, thinking the same. But perhaps that was a mistake, as Williams glared at him. Oh, a greenhorn dares to speak against me. I came here today hoping for your approval to marry Amy. Sam responded, looking straight at the daunting figure before him. He was determined to marry Amy, no matter the opponent. Inspired by his courage, I also faced Williams. My son is diligent at work and highly regarded by his superiors. He's still in his 20s, but I believe he has a promising future. Desperate to join our ranks, are you? Williams scoffed. Keeping my cool against his snide remark, I said, I only wish for my son and Amy's happiness. Please, grant them your blessing for their marriage. Then I bowed my head down to the table. Please, let your daughter marry me. Sam followed suit, bowing deeply. However, Williams clicked his tongue loudly. Didn't you hear? I decide if you are suitable to be my son-in-law. Dad, don't raise your voice. It's disturbing the other patrons. Amy intervened. Be quiet. Your marriage is my decision to make. Despite Amy's attempt to stop him, Williams glared back at us. Why are only two of you here? It's only polite for both parents to come to a marriage meeting. You know that Sam's mother. It seems Sam had already explained our family situation to her. But Williams appeared to have completely forgotten. My wife passed away when Sam was in high school. Since then, it's just been the two of us, I explained. We've overcome the grief of losing family members and are here now. My role, having outlived my wife, is to ensure Sam's happiness. So, it's a father-son household. Such broken people shouldn't dare approach our family, Williams sneered. Sam and I were stunned by his insult. Amy and her mother looked at Williams in disbelief. Please take back what you just said. I might overlook it if it was just about me. But I can't ignore an insult towards my father and late mother. Sam, sitting beside me, was visibly angry, his face turning red. An insult. I'm merely stating facts. Williams scoffed, taunting him further. Then, ignoring our opinions, he bombarded us with questions. Any promotions in the pipeline? If the current project I'm negotiating succeeds, there might be a chance for a promotion to manager. And you think that's enough to marry into? Williams laughed mockingly. Every time Sam answered, Williams would laugh at him as if mocking him. The atmosphere felt as oppressive as a stress interview, weighing heavily on the room. Amy and her mother, perhaps frightened by Williams, remained silent and looked down the whole time. I only like high-educated elites, surely. Sam, you've graduated from a decent university, right? I was getting angry at the way he was sizing up Sam. Facing Williams, who judged us as lesser and sneered, I wanted to put him in his place. But I knew any rash actions could jeopardize Sam's marriage. I studied economics at a national university and have experience studying abroad. Sam responded firmly, unfazed by Williams's oppressive questioning. Amy seemed relieved by his demeanor. I felt proud of my son. But perhaps disliking Sam's attitude, Williams frowned and turned to me with a question. "And where did you go to university?" I felt an unpleasant premonition but could not lie. Due to financial reasons, I only graduated from middle school and never went to college. At my answer, Williams twitched his eyebrow and fell silent. Amid the heavy silence, Sam spoke up. "Educational backgrounds don't matter between Amy and I. We are serious about wanting to marry. So..." Just as he continued, Williams's fist struck Sam's face. Sam. He was sent flying, crashing through the sliding doors onto the outside corridor. A passing server screamed in shock. I moved my wheelchair to see Sam with his nose swollen and red. Amy rushed over and pressed a handkerchief to his nose. At this point, my patience with Williams had run out. "What are you doing to my son?" I yelled at him, and Williams looked down on us with cold disdain. "A single father with only a middle school education. I wouldn't want my daughter marrying into that. Get out." It seemed he had struck Sam because of his disdain for our family background and educational level. "Let's meet again." Filled with the urge to retaliate but prioritizing Sam's care, I knew we needed to get him to a hospital due to a possible fracture. After giving Williams a stern look, I asked a server to call a taxi. While waiting, I asked Williams one last question. "Do you recognize my face by any chance, Mr. Williams?" "What? I wouldn't know someone as poor-looking as you." Williams glanced at me and scoffed dismissively. "Is that so? That's too bad." "What? Trying to say you're not the bottom of the barrel?" He sneered. I didn't respond, and as the taxi arrived, the server helped us get in. Amy also tearfully offered to accompany us, so the three of us went to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Amy spoke up softly. "My father has always been like this, always saying, 'We are a noble family.' It seems Williams grew into such an arrogant person due to the privileged environment he was raised in. Having too much wealth seems to corrupt people. Yet, Amy is such a kind-hearted woman, unlike what one would expect from someone like him. She's still showing concern for Sam now. How happy Sam and she would be if they got married. But the huge obstacle they face is Williams. Wanting to support them, I said to Amy, "We might have to confront your father, and it might affect you, your mother, and your home." She looked at me with wide eyes. Then with a determined look, she replied, "No matter what, I want to marry Sam. I will tell my mother myself." Knowing her feelings, I took out my cell phone and made a call. "Hello, it's me. Sorry for the urgency, but gather everyone for an emergency." Soon after, we arrived at the hospital. Fortunately, Sam did not have any fractures, only needing some ointment. We got a medical report from the doctor, now ready to handle Williams whenever necessary. The next day, I went to a rented conference room somewhere in downtown. Worried about me, Sam was with his assistant today due to work. When I entered the conference room, many people were already there, including some older gentlemen and a woman in her 40s wearing glasses. Williams was also present. Seeing me, he looked utterly shocked. "Why are you here?" he exclaimed loudly. As soon as he raised his voice, the others in the room glared at him. Noticing the odd atmosphere, Williams looked around nervously. "What's going on with everyone?" "It's obvious, Mr. Williams," you shouted, one remarked. "What, more importantly, why is a middle school grad in this sacred place?" Initially shocked, Williams now looked at me with disdain. "I gathered everyone here urgently," I responded. "What, you are not an outsider?" Williams shouted in anger. But inciting his emotions further, I smirked mischievously. Is it appropriate to speak to me like that, considering I'm the majority shareholder? Or Williams's face turned to disbelief, and I couldn't help but laugh. My goodness, not knowing your own company's shareholders. What a noble family, I taunted. What? It's true. I own more than half of the company's shares and attend shareholder meetings. Though being in a wheelchair, I might not seem very noticeable. I had called the shareholders yesterday to organize an emergency shareholder meeting. Thank you for attending despite the short notice, I said, bowing to the shareholders, who returned the gesture with smiles. Then, looking back at Williams, who stared at me wide-eyed, he flinched under my gaze. Thank you for yesterday. I wanted to express my gratitude by holding this emergency shareholder meeting here. What gratitude? Williams trembled nervously. As the principal shareholder, I've worked as an investor. Even now, from my wheelchair, I analyze market trends and mentor juniors on investment strategies. The profits from my investments have exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars, enabling me to provide financial aid to numerous companies. In return, as a shareholder, I can influence the company's management policies and participate in the appointment and dismissal of executives. I would like to discuss a proposal for the dismissal of President Williams, I said. What? Fire me? That's ridiculous, Williams exclaimed and tried to leave the room. However, other shareholders blocked the door. Last night, when I told the shareholders about the emergency general meeting, they agreed with me and proposed a vote of no confidence against Williams. Considering he struck the son of the principal shareholder, appropriate sanctions are necessary, I stated, glaring at Williams. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he began to sweat and panic. Yet, he chuckled smugly, then burst out laughing. Ha ha, you think you can intimidate me? I won't let my family's legacy crumble in my generation. Williams looked around at the shareholders. If you fire me, this company is finished. Our brand stands out because of its 100-year history. I plan to merge it with another company I support, I retorted. What? I am also a major shareholder in another company and considered merging it with Williams's. I was prepared to use any means necessary to oust this contemptible man from his presidency. It's called an absorption merger. Your company will be absorbed by another, I explained. What? I won't allow it, Williams stated defiantly. An absorption merger would mean he could no longer be president. Sensing his position was threatened, he directed hostility towards me. I won't let someone who knows nothing about running this family business take it from me. I can't let the injustice done to my son go unaddressed, I countered. We glared at each other, the tension palpable. Then Williams pointed at me with a cunning smile. You say he was harmed, but do you have any proof? Proof? It's rude to accuse someone without proof. You won't be easily forgiven even if you apologize on your knees. Then he loudly addressed the other shareholders. Have any of you seen proof from Mr. Tim? They looked at each other and shook their heads. I had only verbally informed them of the situation. Nobody has any proof. Then Mr. Tim's claims must be false. The room began to murmur, and suspicious glances were cast my way. Confident he had turned the situation around, Williams gloated. You almost deceived everyone with your lies. I should sue you for defamation and get a hefty compensation. As he approached me, still silent, he taunted. Why don't you say something? Or perhaps you do have proof? Yes, I replied. What? I had my assistant prepare something special. I had a projector set up in front of the screen and connected it to my cell phone. I've obtained special cooperation for the agenda, I will now play a video, I announced to Williams and the others. I then played the video stored on my phone. Displayed on the screen was a scene of the Williams family and my family having a meal together. The footage was shot from an overhead perspective, clearly from a security camera. When Williams realized he was on camera, he started to panic. "What is this video? When did you get this?" He tried to approach me, but the shareholders held him back. I had anticipated this and secured the evidence in advance. In fact, after sending Sam to the hospital yesterday, I went back to the restaurant. I explained the situation to the owner and the waitress and bought the security footage from them. "Did you bribe the restaurant? What a low move," Williams exclaimed. "I'm not so naive as to stay silent after my son was attacked," I retorted. The video continued to play, showing the scene where Sam was answering Williams's questions before Williams struck him. The shareholders gasped in shock. In the video, Williams was seen yelling at us. "A single father with only a middle school education. I wouldn't want my daughter marrying into that. Get out." Then the footage showed us leaving for the hospital by taxi. However, the video didn't end there. While Amy, Sam, and I were on our way to the hospital, Williams and his group were still at the restaurant. Williams's expression tensed up as he watched. "Stop this video now," he yelled at me, but I had no intention of complying. Ignoring him, I turned up the volume. In the video, Williams was reproached by his wife and then slapped her. "Silence. As my wife, you obey without question. I won't tolerate backtalk from you, the company staff, or those pompous shareholders. You're all just pawns to me." The video ended with his wife sobbing, and the screen went blank. Silence fell over the room. Nobody spoke. Williams stood pale-faced in front of the screen. That was the evidence video of President Williams hitting my son. Oh, and the last part was just a bonus, I said with a smirk. "Now, you can't deny it happened," I continued. Williams, trembling, turned to face the shareholders. "Ah," he squeaked, stepping back in a pathetic manner. The shareholders glared at him fiercely, ready to pounce. With the proof presented and his disdain for the shareholders revealed, Williams found himself cornered by everyone present. "You insulted the people who fund you. You know what happens next, right?" Williams's face contorted as he began to unravel. "One can only imagine what happens to a company once its shareholders turn their backs," I added with a smirk. "Even the vast wealth of the Williams family would be severely hit if the shareholders collectively abandoned them. Moreover, if the incident with Sam and Williams's harshness were exposed externally, it would damage the company's image. Client transactions might also be withdrawn." "Okay, I understand. I'll increase the dividends for everyone, so please forgive me," Williams pleaded, putting his hands together in front of the shareholders. But they were furious, saying, "We can't forgive someone who's insulted us behind our backs. Please, I'm terribly sorry, forgive me." Williams kept apologizing. Surrounded by the majority of people, now forced into a humble posture. Normally bold, he quickly cowers when his position weakens. Seeing this, I realized, that's the real Williams. Raised in privilege and pampered from birth, he lost any sense of gratitude, using his ancestors' prestige to look down on others. Living luxuriously and complacent, Williams struck Sam without knowing I was the principal shareholder. This is the result of his choice. Unable to gain forgiveness from the shareholders, he half cried, clinging to me. "Mr. Tim, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. Do you regret hitting my son?" He nodded vigorously and knelt before me. "Absolutely. I will also pay damages to your son. So please continue to support us financially." "I refuse. My goal is to remove you from the presidency." Then I continued. "We met before the marriage meeting, remember, at that restaurant we visited?" Art. He finally recalled our meeting at the restaurant, his face turning pale as he trembled. "A company that can't train its staff properly isn't worth supporting." I gave him a cold look. Out of desperation, Williams blurted out an incredible offer. "Then, I will give you my daughter Amy. I have raised her strictly. She is a fine woman. Please, do as you wish with her." Despite it being his own daughter, he treated her like an object, which enraged me. "Don't mess with me. Children are not offerings." Anger nearly caused me to fall from my wheelchair. "I apologize, but Amy wishes to marry Sam, and her will is also my will." "Oh, so you won't oppose Miss Amy's wishes?" "Of course not." As I smiled slightly, he returned a nervous smile, misunderstanding my forgiveness. He slumped down, relieved. "Let's hear it from the person herself then." I called out towards the door, "Come on in." As the door opened, Sam, Amy, and Williams's wife entered. Seeing the three, Williams's mouth fell open in astonishment. "Why are you all here?" "We came together." I had asked the three of them to wait by the door until I gave them a signal. I called the three of them here to directly confront Williams with their intentions. "Father-in-law." Sam, with gauze on his nose, glared at Williams. Seeing Sam and me, Williams quickly bowed his head to him. "Sam, I deeply apologize for raising my hand against you. I am very sorry." Sam didn't respond and turned to face Amy. "My desire to marry Amy remains unchanged, but first, please hear what she has to say." Amy looked straight at her father and said, "I have lived obeying your orders, grateful for how you raised me, but now I choose to be with Sam." Amy. She and her mother stood side by side, glaring at Williams. "My mother and I are leaving the house and will cut ties with you." Whoa. In the taxi, I learned about her decision to separate from Williams. That's why I brought them here to tell him directly. "Why, how, you're my wife, aren't you?" He grabbed his wife's shoulder, shaking her. However, she presented him with signed divorce papers. "I will not let a cruel husband dictate my daughter's life." Sam and Amy then declared to Williams, "We will get married after cutting ties with you. And my mother and I are leaving home. Thank you for everything up to now." She bowed her head, signifying their estrangement. Rejected by his family, Williams sobbed and clung desperately. "No, don't abandon me. I've been awful, raising my hand and speaking harshly. I regret it. Don't leave me." But they looked down on him expressionlessly. Seizing the moment of his isolation, I addressed the shareholders. "Let's get back to the main issue. Those in favor of dismissing President Williams, please applaud." A few scattered claps gradually grew louder. When everyone except Williams clapped, his fate was sealed. "This marks the end of your glorious life. Curse your own foolishness." No. Williams collapsed to the floor, weeping loudly. With that, the emergency shareholder meeting was concluded. Subsequently, the company was absorbed through a merger, and Williams was stripped of his executive position. Now ostracized by former business associates aware of his brutality, he found himself utterly alone. Moreover, a skilled lawyer hired by his wife exposed years of domestic harassment, resulting in a multi-million-dollar settlement. The once prestigious Williams family ended with his generation. Williams tried to start new businesses using the remnants of his fortune, but soon faced financial difficulties and went bankrupt repeatedly, increasing his debts until nothing was left. His mansion was seized for debt repayment, and all valuable possessions were confiscated. Without work, family, or a home, Williams wondered until he became homeless. One wonders what his ancestors, who had built such wealth, would think seeing him now. Likely standing at his bedside at night, whispering words of resentment. After the merger, Amy and her mother lived modestly, their faces brightening, freed from Williams's oppressive presence. Relieved, Sam happily married Amy. They built a new home and invited me to live with them. Initially, I refused, not wanting to intrude on the newlyweds, but they insisted, and I was spared loneliness. And one thing I almost forgot. I finally gave Sam the wedding gift I had carefully been saving for him.
He said people who only finished middle school aren't even worth talking to.
During a company trip, my colleagues ignored me because he had been insulting me as a middle school grad, or the guy who got in through connections. My patience had reached its limit. I wanted to lash out at him right then and there, but I held back. That's because I had a brilliant idea.
I'm heading home then.
After telling my colleague that, I decided to book a return flight immediately. Upon completing the company trip and returning to the office, my colleague was faced with, "My name is Brown, and I'm 40 years old. I'm an office worker. Born as the eldest son in a large family, we weren't rich, but I enjoyed every day. In middle school, I was only good at academics. I thought about going to high school, but I gave it up. Considering our family finances, it was better to start working immediately."
You don't have to worry about us.
No, I decided because it's what I wanted to do, so I'm going to work.
Of course, my parents were against me finishing with just a middle school education. But I insisted and started working after graduation. However, still being inexperienced, I faced a lot of hardships in the real world. Being only a middle school grad meant I was often looked down upon. But, with my natural tenacity, I persevered at my job at the Chinese restaurant where I was hired to help.
Hey, you're working hard again today. Just don't overdo it.
Yes, thank you so much for your concern.
If I was the first one in for prep or took the initiative to clean, gradually, the others' perceptions of me began to change. Even a senior coworker, who had previously ridiculed me for being naive due to my education, started to acknowledge me for the first time. While surprised, I was genuinely happy and responded energetically. Realizing that this is what it means to have your efforts rewarded made me even more dedicated to my job. As I gained more social knowledge and improved my interpersonal skills. By the time I had been working there for 4 years, I began to consider leveling up my skills. Then, a senior coworker suggested I interview at a well-known local company.
There are plenty of recent grads applying, so you should feel comfortable going for it. Good luck. I'm rooting for you.
Thank you so much, I really owe you a lot.
Encouraged by my senior who celebrated my new beginning, I thanked him deeply with a bow. While it was sad to leave the familiar job and the senior I had gotten close to, it was time to take the next step. The interview the next day was nerve-wracking, but a week later, I received an email notification of my hiring. Even with just a middle school education, I felt a sense of achievement that my efforts had paid off.
That's great. You got the job at the company you wished for. Keep up the good work. We're supporting you.
My parents said, delighted as if it were their own achievement. Encouraged by my family, I approached my first day at the new job with a mix of nerves and excitement.
My name is Brown, and I'll be working in this department. I look forward to your guidance.
After the orientation, I was guided to my new department where I introduced myself energetically. The applause and smiles from my new bosses eased my nerves and filled me with joy. I was determined to do my best here. But that feeling was short-lived. after all my colleagues had finished their introductions and were waiting for their supervisors to be introduced. A colleague approached me.
Which university are you from? You didn't mention your university during your introduction.
He asked, curious why I hadn't mentioned a university. His name was White.
I didn't go to college, I only finished middle school.
It was embarrassing to say it myself, but I believed in honesty and gave an honest answer. However, as soon as White heard that, he burst out laughing suddenly.
A middle school grad? Seriously, how did you even get into this company? Who's your connection? Tell me.
A connection, I didn't use any.
Not only was I ridiculed for being a middle school grad, but White also misunderstood that I got hired through someone's connection. I completely denied it, but he couldn't seem to accept it.
If that's not it, there's no way a middle school dropout could get into this company.
Everyone else, including me, graduated from prestigious universities. I'd even graduated from the University of Tokyo.
The University of Tokyo, that's impressive.
Feeling overwhelmed upon hearing about the University of Tokyo, White continued proudly.
That's right, isn't it? Everyone else got into this company based on their skills. I won't lose to you.
Even though there's no competition, for some reason, I was seen as a rival. Shortly after joining the company, friction arose between White and me.
Brown and White, sorry for being late.
I'm Smith, your supervisor. Nice to meet you. If there's anything you don't understand, or if you're in trouble, feel free to ask me anything. Perhaps caught up in his own work, our boss, Mr. Smith, hurried over to us with a smile and greeted us warmly.
I'm White. Nice to meet you.
Contrary to his previous attitude towards me, White responded energetically with a smile that left a good impression. Despite his terrible attitude, I found solace in the fact that our boss, Mr. Smith, made a good impression. So, I decided to greet White with the same energy. Little did I know, this was just the beginning.
Good morning.
The next day, as I arrived at the office, I greeted my other colleagues, but there was no response. I found it strange. But my suspicions were confirmed when White appeared, chatting with the same colleague from before walking away. At that moment, when White glanced at me and smirked, I knew for sure that something was up. He must have spread the rumor about me being a middle school grad to our other colleagues. Is this something unacceptable in this company? Is it because they think I got in through connections? I couldn't help but sigh. Then, someone's hand suddenly rested on my shoulder, startling me reflexively.
Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you, but...
Good morning, Mr. Smith. Sorry, I just got startled, so don't worry about it.
I said as Mr. Smith, resting his hand on my shoulder, approached. However, I couldn't help but feel my face twitch, wondering if he had heard my sigh earlier.
You seem a bit down. Everything all right?
Of course, I'm fine. I'm looking forward to your guidance as always.
Feeling guilty for worrying him, I tried to cover it up with an energetic response. Mr. Smith didn't seem particularly suspicious, and we headed to the office, chatting along the way. However, White's hostility towards me escalated day by day.
Hey, nepotism much. Do your job properly, all right?
Every time we crossed paths at work, he would mockingly call me nepotism guy or middle school grad, making a deliberate effort to ridicule me. Ignoring him only seemed to agitate White further. Moreover, because of what he had spread to other colleagues, I was now being called nepotism guy and middle school grad by them as well. It was tough, but I used it as a motivator to excel at work. Come to think of it, this wasn't the first time. Even when I worked at the Chinese restaurant, I wasn't recognized by those around me and had to work under frustration. Thinking back on that time, I found myself getting fired up at the thought of being bothered by such minor harassment and immersed myself in work. And before I knew it, 3 years had flown by. I became competent in my job and learned to provide customer-oriented service. Thanks to that, I built trust, and now our performance is on the rise.
You're the top performer in sales again this month, Brown. You're doing great. Keep it up.
Yes, thank you, sir.
I replied, feeling proud as the manager praised me. For White, who overheard this praise by chance, it was probably not amusing. Little did I know he was gritting his teeth in frustration. However, his resentment would manifest in the worst possible scenario. It was during the annual company trip, which happened once a year. This year, our company decided to go to Vietnam.
When you think of Vietnam, you think of pho, right? I wonder if it's tasty.
I couldn't help but laugh as I watched Mr. Smith already getting excited about the Vietnam trip. But I was also looking forward to it eagerly. After all, this would be my first ever overseas trip. During my student days, our family struggled financially, so even traveling domestically was out of the question. Now that I'm working, most of my earnings go towards supporting my family, so thanks to the company trip, I can finally fulfill my dream of traveling abroad. And so, the day of the company trip arrived. Gathering at the airport at the designated time, everyone had their carry-on bags ready, presented their passports, and boarded the plane bound for Vietnam.
It's going to be fun for the next 2 days, I said to White, who was sitting next to me.
He hadn't been harassing me lately, so I assumed his hostility towards me had diminished, or so I thought. White, however, didn't respond to me, instead gazing out of the window at the scenery beyond. Perhaps he simply didn't hear me. I thought so, until I noticed another colleague sitting behind us purposely addressing White, to which he responded. Feeling a bit miffed by his blatant disregard, I had thought he was starting to acknowledge me by continuing to interact with other colleagues. But it turned out that wasn't the case, which left me feeling a bit disheartened. However, I couldn't control how others felt, so I tried to switch my mindset. Just as I was doing so, he finished his conversation with the other colleague and unexpectedly directed some harsh words at me.
Don't you dare look down on me like you're all that. You got in here through connections.
Ha!
At first, I thought I must have misheard. However, when I looked at White sitting next to me, he was sneering at me. Realizing it wasn't a mishearing, I shot him a sharp glare. What was with this sudden change in attitude? And to say that I simply got in through connections again after not putting me down for a while, it was beyond despicable. Then, to add insult to injury, White continued with some outrageous remarks.
Talking to a middle school grad like you isn't even worth it.
Since our precious Vietnam trip is going to be wasted on you, just book a flight back. Unbelievably, he was telling me to book an immediate flight back once we arrived in Vietnam. It seemed that what he had been discussing with the colleague behind us was about this. As I could hear White and the colleague chuckling together. Usually, I'd channel that frustration into my work, but now we were on a company trip. To hear such nerve-wracking comments during what was supposed to be an enjoyable trip with everyone made me furious.
What's wrong? Can't say anything when you're told the truth.
White's words, delivered in a way that only fueled my anger, shook me with rage. At that moment, something snapped inside me. I had thought that I was relieving the stress of White's harassment by focusing on work. But perhaps without realizing it, I had been accumulating resentment. While pondering this, I found myself uttering those words.
All right, I'm out. Take care, okay?
Huh?
Suppressing the rage that was about to explode, I squarely faced White and said. White couldn't quite grasp my response at first and seemed bewildered for a moment, but soon interpreted it as sour grapes.
I'll make sure to tell Mr. Smith and the boss about it, that you went back home because you felt sick.
Seemingly intent on attributing my return solely to feeling unwell, White continued to cackle in a crude manner. Following his lead, colleagues from the seats behind joined in the mockery. And so, 6 hours after our departure, we all safely arrived at the airport in Vietnam. After retrieving my carry-on bag, I immediately excused myself from the group and booked a flight back.
Can't seen Brown around. White, you know anything?
Noticing my absence, Mr. Smith scanned the area while asking White. But White just smirked as if it were his time to shine.
Brown said he's going back to book an immediate flight back, said he ain't feeling too well.
If he's unwell, why didn't he go to a hospital in Vietnam? And why no report to me? What the heck's going on with him?
Mr. Smith, suspicious of my unusual behavior, expressed disbelief, unable to fathom the situation. Seeing White's dissatisfaction, Mr. Smith felt compelled to report my absence to the manager.
Manager, I heard from White that apparently Brown booked a flight back due to feeling unwell.
Brown, he's usually diligent about reporting to us, so why would he make such a decision?
He could have received treatment at a hospital in Vietnam. The manager also found my actions suspicious and pointed them out. Since Mr. Smith had only heard the story from White, he faltered in his response.
Anyway, please ask White for more details. I'll try calling Brown.
Understood.
Agreeing with the manager's decision, Mr. Smith followed the instructions and headed straight to White. As the manager bid him farewell, he took out his phone from his pocket and proceeded to contact me. On the other hand, upon my immediate return, I eventually answered the manager's call. After chatting for a while and ending the call with the manager, it was decided that I would return to work the next day. While everyone else enjoyed a company trip in Vietnam, I didn't mind working. In fact, I felt refreshed and ready to tackle the tasks at hand. There were a few other employees who also stayed back at the company instead of joining the company trip to Vietnam. As I eagerly anticipated White's inevitable downfall and patiently awaited his return, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. 3 days passed, and the day finally arrived to finish work in the company trip. Mr. Smith contacted me, confirming everyone's safe return from Vietnam.
Vietnam trip was fun. Back to the grind now.
The following day, White strolled into the office, looking like he had thoroughly enjoyed the company trip. Letting out a big yawn, he seemed rather disheveled. It's amusing considering he insists he's a Tokyo University graduate. Watching from the shadows, I headed to my department before White. As White spotted me and smirked, he predictably approached me.
Feeling better, middle school grad.
Morning, White. Oh, much better, thanks. Seems like you had a blast on the Vietnam trip, huh?
Well, yeah.
He probably didn't expect a smile in response. White seemed taken aback by my smile. Looking at my amused reaction, he seemed to realize something was different.
You're pretending to be unamused? We had a blast on the company trip without you, dude.
Is that so? I was handling business during that time, I retorted, holding back my frustration.
Got yourself into this mess? Or are you planning to blame me?
White's mocking gaze clashed with my sharp glare. Amidst the sparks flying between us, I broke the silence first.
I never said that, but you better be ready for payback.
Payback? What can a middle school grad like you do? He sneered.
Keep looking down on me because I'm a high school grad, you'll soon regret it, just wait and see.
I replied angrily before returning to my work. White, still chuckling, seemed to think my attitude was just a bluff or a sign of defeat. However, a few hours later, my words turned into reality, and White realized.
Hey, seems like you took over my client dealings while I was on the company trip.
You should have received notifications. Why didn't you report it? Getting back at me already. White was complaining to me about taking care of my client matters while I was on the company trip. But I paid him no attention, focusing solely on my work, staring at my computer screen.
Hey, are you even listening? You better not have stolen my clients, you hear?
Frustrated with someone who could only raise their voice in panic, I slammed my fist onto the desk.
Steele, could you please refrain from saying such rude things? Why don't you think about why I ended up handling your clients?
Huh?
Only after I said that did White, with his feeble mind, attempt to think. Yes, even though White knew in advance that he would be away from the company for about 3 days on the company trip. He finally remembered, albeit too late. Sweat started to bead on White's forehead as he realized he had attracted attention by raising his voice.
Right? I forgot. Sorry. Thanks for covering for me. You won.
Saying that with a forced laugh, White patted my shoulder familiarly, but the surrounding gazes were painful. Of course, the gaze directed at him from me was as well.
There were strong requests from your clients to change their representative to me.
How about making a phone call of apology right now if you don't like it? After being told by me, a high school graduate, and likely feeling thoroughly embarrassed, White's face turned bright red this time. Deciding not to say any more, I returned to my work.
If you had time to blame others, you should have done some work instead, huh?
Stop, you're loud enough to be heard.
Chuckled the nearby female employees at White. Realizing he had only brought more embarrassment upon himself, he quickly left the scene to make apology calls to the clients. However, it wasn't just a matter concerning those clients alone. While White was on the company trip, I had also handled his clients without bothering to inform him. White might just complain about not receiving any notification, but ultimately, they were his clients, so he had to deal with them.
I'm truly sorry. You're absolutely right.
Watching from afar as White, burdened with apologies to each client, used the company phone, I couldn't help but smirk. It seemed like a good lesson for him.
It's good I could get back at you during the company trip, Brown,
remarked Smith, addressing me while White was still making apology calls. He was already aware of the tension between me and White. Apparently, he had heard about it from the manager when I rushed back from the company trip. Yes, I had discussed the tension between White and me with the manager when I answered the call from him that time. Upon my return as per White's request, the manager listened sympathetically until the end. The suggestion from the manager was to resume work at the company as usual. Previously, when White took paid leave and missed appointments with clients, the manager had given him a stern warning. Perhaps worried that White might repeat the same mistake not once but twice, the manager requested confirmation from me. As expected, when I investigated, despite White having prior commitments with clients, he took the initiative and contacted his clients, handling them instead.
Thanks to Mr. Smith and the others, I'm really grateful.
White said, aligning his story with mine. I hadn't expected Mr. Smith to support me so strongly just from talking to the manager and Mr. Smith alone. Reflecting, I realized I should have reached out for help instead of shouldering everything myself. In the end, it was my own stubbornness that led to this, and I chastised myself for not being able to go on the company trip. Afterwards, despite White apologizing to each client, they didn't forgive him and demanded a change in representatives. And it was everyone, not just one or two. The one who sprang into action in this situation was, of course, the manager. I was summoned by the manager, and it seems there will be a discussion involving the president as well. Next, I was called to the president's office and moved there with the manager.
Man, this is bad. White got dragged to the president's office over the Brown incident during the company trip.
No way.
During the break, while having a coffee with Mr. Smith, colleagues who had been hanging out with White started making a fuss upon hearing the news about him. Apparently in quite a panic. White had spread the word to other colleagues, oblivious to my presence, so I pretended to cough conspicuously. Finally noticing me, they looked shocked, as if they'd just seen a ghost.
You guys might get called in later too. Better be prepared.
Mr. Smith said with a smirk, and in no time, the faces of my colleagues turned pale. The effect was immediate, and my colleagues dashed out of the break room. Seeing their reaction, Smith and I exchanged glances and burst into laughter.
Did Dad ever have something like that when he was young?
Yeah, I was.
17 years had passed since then. Now at 40, I was recounting the past with White to my middle school daughter. Back then, I was 23 and single, but later found love and got married at 28. Then, we had a daughter. At 40, I was promoted to manager. Mr. Smith became the president, and reminiscing led to White's topic coming up. In the end, after that incident, White was fired by the president, and the colleagues who had colluded with him were also dismissed. While they weren't all fired, some were demoted or transferred to other departments. The president mentioned that White, who was fired, seemed like a shell of his former self throughout the ordeal. White seemed to be working at some convenience store. And President Smith, who witnessed him, mentioned that he had fallen so low that you wouldn't believe he was a former Tokyo University student. Back then, if he hadn't looked down on people based on their academic background, perhaps there could have been a different future. I quietly tucked away the memories of White and stopped retracing them any further.
Well then, I'm off to work today.
Take care on your way, I'm cheering for you.
Dad, do your best.
My wife and daughter saw me off. I waved back in response and headed to work as usual. Things were going smoothly at work. And I couldn't help but think again that it was really a good decision to muster the courage and consult with the manager and President Smith back then.
I never thought I'd be living alone in this house at 62. Running my fingers along the smooth wooden banister as I climbed the stairs each evening, I can't help but think about all the generations of my family who've done the same. This house on Maple Street has been in my family for over a century, and I've called it home for most of my life. My name is Caroline Mitchell, and 20 years ago, my husband Robert left me for his 25-year-old secretary. Our son Tommy was only 12 at the time. I remember the day Robert told me he was leaving as if it were yesterday. He stood in our kitchen, not meeting my eyes, fumbling with his wedding ring. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I never meant for this to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I just stood there, gripping the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. "Does she make you happy, Robert?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, still not looking at me. "I'll make sure Tommy is taken care of. I'll pay good alimony." And he did keep that promise, I'll give him that. Every month, without fail, the money came in. I saved every penny of it for Tommy's college fund, working extra hours at the marketing firm to cover our daily expenses. The house, thank goodness, was already paid for, my grandmother's final gift to me. This house has been my anchor through everything. Film crews even used it once for a period piece about the Civil War era, saying it perfectly captured the essence of that time. The producer offered to buy it for an obscene amount of money, but I couldn't sell it. This house isn't just walls and windows, it's my heritage, my story. After Robert left, I threw myself into my work and raising Tommy. Dating? It never felt right. My colleagues would try to set me up, but I always declined. "I'm married to my career," I'd joke, but the truth was, I'd lost faith in love. Tommy became my whole world. I made sure he had everything he needed: love, support, guidance. We had our routines: breakfast together every morning, homework at the kitchen table, Sunday movie nights. He graduated with honors and went to a good college, thanks to his father's alimony payments. When Tommy brought home Amy from work last year, I tried to be welcoming. She seemed nice enough, always smiling, complimenting the house, asking about family photos. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she'd change the subject whenever work came up. Still, I told myself I was just being an overprotective mother. "Mom, we're getting married," Tommy announced over dinner one evening. I remember forcing a smile and hugging them both, pushing down the nagging feeling in my gut. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, and I meant it. Or at least, I wanted to mean it. The wedding was small but lovely. I sat in the front row, watching my boy promise his life to this woman I barely knew. Robert was there too, with his new family, wife number 2, and their teenage twins. We nodded politely to each other but didn't speak. Everything seemed fine at first. They got an apartment across town, both working at the same tech startup. I'd have them over for dinner sometimes, watching how Amy would inspect everything in the house with those calculating eyes of hers. But I never imagined how quickly things would change, or that my peaceful life was about to be turned upside down. I was at work when I got the call from Tommy. His voice was shaking, and I could tell he'd been crying. "Mom, they're laying off half the company. Both Amy and I, we're being let go." My heart sank. I knew how hard it was to lose a job. I'd seen enough colleagues go through it over my years in marketing. "Take a deep breath, honey. Tell me what you need." "We won't be able to make next month's rent," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our savings, they're pretty much gone." After some quick calculations, I transferred enough money to cover 3 months of rent for their apartment. It wasn't a small amount, but I had some savings, and this was my son. "This should give you both time to find new jobs," I told him. The weeks that followed were a mix of hope and disappointment. Tommy landed a new position at a smaller company, but the salary was significantly lower than what he'd been making before. Amy, on the other hand, well, I tried not to judge, but her job search seemed half-hearted at best. When I'd visit them, I'd often find her scrolling through social media instead of job listings. Then came another call from Tommy, just as the 3 months were coming to an end. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but is there any chance we could stay with you for a while? Just until things get better?" I looked around my big empty house, thinking of all the unused rooms. "Of course, honey. You know there's always space for you here." They arrived on a Sunday afternoon, their car packed with belongings. As I helped them carry boxes up to Tommy's old room, I couldn't help but notice Amy's eyes darting around the house, taking everything in with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Caroline," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "your room is just gorgeous. And that home office setup, it would be perfect for our workspace while we're job hunting. Maybe Tommy and I could take that room? It's bigger, and since there are 2 of us." "I'm sorry, Amy," I said firmly but politely, "but that's my personal space. I need my office for work, and I sometimes have to take calls late at night. Tommy's old room is quite spacious, and you'll have plenty of storage in the guest room across the hall." Her face fell, and though she didn't say anything, the look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. She pursed her lips and turned away, dragging her suitcase up the stairs with more force than necessary. Tommy gave me an apologetic smile. "Thanks for this, Mom. We really appreciate it." Life settled into a new routine, or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. Every morning, I'd get up at 6, make coffee, and head to work. Tommy would leave around the same time for his new job. And Amy, well, Amy would still be asleep. I tried not to think about it too much during those first few days. "She's probably still applying for jobs online," I told myself. But as the days went by, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Each evening when I returned from work, I'd find her exactly where she'd been that morning, sprawled on my living room couch, phone in hand, surrounded by empty snack bags and coffee mugs. The dishes from her lunch would be piled in the sink, crumbs scattered across my kitchen counter. "How was the job search today?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, nothing really suitable for my qualifications," she'd reply without looking up from her phone. 2 weeks passed like this. The house, which I'd always kept immaculate, was starting to show signs of neglect. Dust gathered on the furniture, dishes piled up, and laundry overflowed from the hampers. After a particularly long day at work, I decided it was time for a gentle conversation. We were sitting at dinner, a meal I'd prepared after cleaning the kitchen first. I cleared my throat nervously. "Amy, honey," I began, keeping my voice as gentle as possible, "I was thinking, since you're home during the day, maybe you could help out a bit with the housework? Just until you find a job, of course." The change in her expression was instant. Her fork clattered against the plate, and her eyes welled up with tears. "I knew it," she cried, turning to Tommy. "I knew she'd try to turn me into her maid. Just because I'm temporarily unemployed doesn't mean I should be your mother's servant." I sat there, stunned. "Amy, that's not what You've been looking down on me since day one." She was full on sobbing now. "You think I'm not good enough for your precious son or your precious house. Amy, please, I didn't mean, but she was already pushing back her chair, running from the table with dramatic flair. Tommy stood up, his face dark with anger. Mom, I can't believe you'd be so cruel to Amy. She's going through a really tough time right now. After that night, things got even worse. I still did all the cooking and cleaning, while they ordered takeout and left their empty containers wherever they finished eating. Out of habit, or maybe hope, I'd still call them to join me for dinner when I cooked. They'd come down, eat without a word, and leave their dirty dishes on the table. The weeks dragged by, each day feeling longer than the last. The sound of the TV from the living room had become a constant backdrop to my home life, along with the gentle tap-tap of Amy's fingers on her phone screen. I tried to stay out of her way, spending more time at the office than necessary, but the situation weighed heavily on my mind. One morning, during our weekly department meeting, our HR director mentioned they were looking for an office manager. My ears perked up immediately. "What's the starting salary?" I asked as casually as I could. $45,000 to start, she replied. "But there's room for growth. We promote from within whenever possible." I thought about Amy's resume. She had a business degree and had worked in administration before. This could be perfect. I spent my lunch break drafting a careful text to Amy about the position, but then deleted it. This was the kind of news better delivered in person. I left work early that day, my heart light with hope. Maybe this could be the solution to our problems. I found Amy in her usual spot on the couch, scrolling through her phone. A half-eaten bag of chips lay on the coffee table, crumbs scattered across the surface. "Amy," I said, trying to keep my voice bright and encouraging. "I have some good news. There's an opening at my company for an office manager. It's entry-level, but there's real potential for advancement. The starting salary is decent, and I could drive you to work. We could commute together." She shot up from the couch, sending the chip bag flying. "Are you serious right now? An office manager? Do you know what my qualifications are?" I just thought. "You thought what? That I'd be happy to fetch coffee and organize paper clips?" Her voice was rising with each word. "I have a business degree. I was a project coordinator." "Amy, please, I didn't mean." "Oh, I know exactly what you meant." She was practically shrieking now. "You think I'm a freeloader. You think I'm lazy. You can't stand the fact that I'm not working, so you're trying to force me into some degrading position." Just then, Tommy walked through the front door, his timing impossibly bad. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Amy rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. "Your mother just insulted me again. She thinks I'm a freeloader. She's trying to force me to take some menial job as an office manager." I stood up, my hands shaking. "Tommy, that's not true. I was just trying to help. There's an opening at my company, and I thought." "Mom, stop." Tommy's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Why do you always have to do this? Why can't you just leave Amy alone?" "Do what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I'm just trying to help." "Help?" Amy scoffed through her tears. "You're trying to humiliate me." She ran up the stairs, her dramatic sobs echoing through the house. Tommy gave me a look of pure disappointment. "I never thought you could be so difficult to live with, Mom," he said, shaking his head. "You're constantly starting drama. It's like you can't help yourself." He followed his wife upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the living room. I sank back into my chair, my half-finished coffee growing cold in my hands. "Starting drama?" I whispered to myself, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. In all my 62 years, no one had ever accused me of being dramatic. The days turned into weeks, and I learned to keep my mouth shut about the job situation. The mere mention of work would make Amy's eyes narrow dangerously, so I stopped bringing it up altogether. It was easier that way, even if it meant watching her waste her days away on my couch. Things changed when Tommy got his first big commission at work. Suddenly, Amy was going out more often, returning with shopping bags from expensive boutiques and fresh manicures that probably cost more than our weekly grocery bill. Not once did she think to pick up laundry detergent or paper towels. Those mundane household items remained my responsibility. I kept hoping that with Tommy's improved income, they'd start looking for their own place. Each morning, I'd check the local rental listings on my phone, imagining them finding a nice apartment across town. But they seemed perfectly content to stay put, making themselves more and more at home in my house. One evening, I came home to find Amy excitedly chatting on her phone in my living room. "Oh my God, yes, the house is absolutely perfect for a party," she was saying. "You should see the vintage chandelier in the dining room. It'll look amazing in photos." I set down my briefcase, my stomach already nodding. "What party?" She hung up and turned to Tommy, who had just walked in. "Babe, we should definitely have our anniversary party here. Can you believe it's been almost 2 years? Where exactly are you planning to have this party?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Here, of course." Amy gestured around my living room. "This house is gorgeous, Caroline. All our friends will love it. I'm thinking we could set up the bar in the foyer, and maybe move some furniture around in the living room to create a dance floor." "Shouldn't you have asked me first?" I interrupted, trying to keep my voice level. But Amy was already scrolling through her phone. "We should invite the Hendersons, and maybe that new couple from your office, Tommy. Oh, and we absolutely need to call that catering company we used for New Year's." I turned to Tommy, hoping he'd say something, but he was nodding along with his wife's plans, a smile on his face. Later that evening, I cornered Tommy in the kitchen. "Mom, I know what you're going to say," he started, "but it would mean so much to Amy. She's been feeling down lately, and this would really lift her spirits." "This is my house, Tommy. You can't just decide to throw a party here without asking me first." "Please, Mom?" He gave me that look, the same one he used to give me when he wanted extra dessert as a child. "I promise we'll take care of everything. I'll even hire a cleaning service to come in afterward. You won't have to lift a finger." I stood there, looking at my son, this man who used to be the considerate boy I raised, and felt my resolve crumbling. "Fine," I sighed, already knowing I'd regret this decision. "But I want everything back in its proper place afterward." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." He hugged me quickly and bounded up the stairs to tell Amy the good news. The week leading up to the party was a whirlwind of activity, none of which I was included in. Amy took over my house like a general, planning a military campaign. Delivery trucks came and went, bringing everything from fancy tablecloths to crystal champagne flutes. She rearranged my furniture without asking, pushing my favorite reading chair into a corner to make room for a makeshift dance floor. I kept my distance, retreating to my office whenever possible. Still, I couldn't help but overhear her endless phone conversations about appetizer selections and wine choices. My grandmother's antique vase was moved to make room for elaborate flower arrangements, and my family photos were taken down to be replaced with string lights and paper lanterns. Friday afternoon, I left work early. I had even bought a new dress for the occasion, nothing too fancy, just a simple navy blue cocktail dress that I thought would be appropriate. As I pulled into my driveway, I could see cars already lining the street. I took a deep breath and walked up to my own front door. Inside, the house was barely recognizable. The furniture had been pushed against the walls, creating an open space in the center where people were already dancing. The air was thick with the smell of catering food and expensive perfume. Amy spotted me from across the room. She was wearing a short silver dress that caught the light from the newly installed party lights, her hair and makeup professionally done. She excused herself from the group she was talking to and walked over to me, her face fixed in an artificial smile. "Caroline," she said, her voice sickly sweet but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I thought you'd be gone by now." I blinked in confusion. "Gone? Why would I be gone?" "Oh." She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "I guess I forgot to mention, this party is really just for our friends. You know, young people? I assumed you'd make other arrangements for the evening. Maybe get a hotel room? I stood there, stunned, as a few of her friends nearby giggled into their champagne glasses. This is my house, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, and you've been so generous letting us use it, Amy said, patting my arm condescendingly. But you have to understand, having someone's mom at an anniversary party is kind of a buzzkill. I looked past her to Tommy, who was standing nearby, watching this exchange. Surely he wouldn't allow this. Surely he would step in and defend me. Mom, he said, walking over. Amy's right. This is really more of a young people's party. It might be better if you weren't here. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been stretching thinner and thinner over the past months, finally snapped. Without a word, I turned and walked up the stairs. Behind me, I could hear Amy's smug voice. See? I knew she'd be reasonable about this. She's probably just gone to pack an overnight bag. I entered Tommy's old room, their room now, and pulled their suitcases from under the bed. My hands were steady as I began emptying drawers, folding nothing, just throwing their clothes into the bags. Designer dresses, expensive suits, all the things they'd bought with Tommy's new salary, into the suitcases they went. I stripped the bed, wrapped their toiletries in a towel, and added those too. The music thumped below as I dragged the heavy suitcases down the stairs, one in each hand. The sound of them bumping against each step drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted as I entered the living room, faces turning from their conversations to watch the scene unfold. Mom? Tommy's voice cracked. What are you doing? I dropped the suitcases in the middle of the makeshift dance floor. You're leaving, now. The party's over. Amy's face contorted with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? She screamed. You can't do this. This is my house, I said, my voice deadly calm. You have exactly 5 minutes to leave before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Mom, come on, Tommy laughed nervously. You're joking, right? I pulled out my phone. 4 minutes. The guests began shuffling toward the door, muttering among themselves. Some were already calling Ubers. You deranged old fool. Amy stepped toward me, her finger pointed at my face. I moved so quickly it surprised even me, closing the distance between us until we were nose to nose. Call me one more name, I said, my voice low and dangerous, and I'll show you exactly how much fight this old fool has left in her. Try me. The color drained from Amy's face. She stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest suitcase. Tommy stood frozen for a moment before reaching for the second bag. Mom, he started. Get out. They walked to the door, Amy still muttering curses under her breath. Tommy looked back once, but I had already turned away, beginning to take down the tacky decorations they'd hung on my walls. After they left, I surveyed the abandoned party scene, tables loaded with untouched food, half-empty champagne glasses scattered everywhere, my grandmother's vase thankfully still intact. I began boxing up the catering trays. The local homeless shelter was still open, at least some good could come from all this food. The weeks after the party passed quietly. Too quietly, perhaps. But after months of chaos, the silence in my house felt like a blessing. I put everything back in its proper place, my reading chair returned to its spot by the window, my family photos back on the walls, my grandmother's vase centerpiece on the dining room table. News travels fast in small towns. Sarah, my friend who works in real estate, told me Tommy and Amy had rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the new complex across town. Funny thing, she said over coffee one morning, Janet from the leasing office is an old friend. Says they almost didn't pass the credit check, but Tommy's new salary just barely got them approved. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. More stories trickled in. Martha, whose niece lives in the same building, reported that the property manager had already given them 2 warnings about the state of their apartment during routine inspections. The place is a mess, Martha confided, shaking her head. Garbage piling up, dishes in the sink for days. Sound familiar? I just nodded, remembering my own kitchen during their stay. Then came word of the arguments. They weren't exactly subtle about it. The neighbors could hear them through the walls, Amy screaming about Tommy's pathetic salary, how she was sick of living in a dump, how none of her friends had to live like this. Tommy firing back about her refusing to work, to cook, to clean, to do anything at all really. They say she throws things sometimes, my friend Linda whispered during our weekly lunch. Tommy was seen sleeping in his car one night last week. Each story made my heart ache a little. Not for Amy, I was done wasting sympathy on her. But for Tommy, he was still my son, despite everything. Sometimes I pick up the phone, my finger hovering over his number, but I always put it down again. This is his lesson to learn, his path to walk. The house feels different now. Peaceful, yes, but also waiting. Like it knows this isn't the end of the story. Some nights, as I sit in my reading chair with a cup of tea, I look at the photos on the wall, Tommy's graduation, his first baseball game, the two of us at the beach when he was 10. I remember the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that mom could fix anything. But I can't fix this for him. He needs to see it for himself, to understand what he's become and find his way back to being the person I raised him to be. Until then, I'll be here in our family home, keeping his room ready, just in case. Not for Amy, that bridge is well and truly burned. But for my son, when he's ready to apologize, to talk, to rebuild. In the meantime, I'm reclaiming my life. I've joined a book club, started taking painting classes on weekends, and even adopted a cat from the local shelter. His name is Oliver, and he's excellent company. He sits with me in the evenings, purring contentedly as I read, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence with empty words. Life goes on, as it always does. And when Tommy's ready, he'll know where to find me.
This story is titled, "My Wife Left for a Month-Long Trial with Her Lover, saying she'd choose between us after, but I made it simple by filing for divorce." Alright, so, I guess I'm writing this because I need to get it out of my system. My name's Mike. I'm 31, and until recently, I thought I had my life figured out. I've always been a pretty simple guy. No wild ambitions, no crazy drama. I've got a steady job as a software developer, a decent house in a quiet neighborhood, and until not too long ago, I thought I had a strong marriage with a woman I truly loved. Laura and I met about 8 years ago, and looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first job, and honestly, pretty clueless about life. She was 22 and working as an assistant at a marketing agency while still figuring out her own career path. For the record, she never did and ended up a stay-at-home wife. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those casual backyard setups where everyone's holding cheap paper plates and someone's always burning the burgers. She was the one who approached me, cracking some sarcastic joke about how I looked like I was strategizing my escape plan. I don't even remember my response, but she laughed, and somehow we ended up chatting for the rest of the evening. From that point on, things moved pretty fast. We started dating, and it felt like she added this spark to my otherwise dull and predictable life. Laura was adventurous and spontaneous, always planning last-minute road trips or dragging me to try some new restaurant she'd read about. Meanwhile, I was the grounded one. I'd be the one figuring out the budget, checking the weather, or double-checking the gas tank before we hit the road. It worked, or at least it felt like it did. We balanced each other out. She brought excitement into my world, and I gave her a sense of stability she said she hadn't had in past relationships. 3 years into dating, we decided to tie the knot. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Neither of us came from wealthy families, so there was no giant ballroom or fancy catering, but it didn't matter. After the wedding, we started building a life together. We bought a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Not the fanciest place, but it had potential. For the most part, things felt stable. I'd go to work, come home, and Laura would usually be in the kitchen or lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She'd tell me stories about her day. She worked in marketing back then, so there was always some drama with clients or coworkers, and I'd listen. That was our dynamic. She was the talker, the one with all the stories, and I was the listener. We didn't have kids, but that was a mutual decision. Laura wasn't in a rush, and honestly, neither was I. We both wanted to wait until we were more financially secure and ready for that next big step. It felt like we were on the same page about most things. Looking back, though, I wonder if I got too comfortable. It's easy to fall into routines, especially when life feels steady. I'd get up, go to work, come home, and repeat. We had our date nights, of course, usually dinner at one of our favorite spots or a movie, but I guess I stopped noticing the little things, like how Laura seemed to thrive on attention. It wasn't a bad thing, at least not at first. She's the kind of person who could light up a room and people naturally gravitate toward her. I think I started taking that for granted, assuming her energy and warmth were just a constant part of our life together. At the time, though, I wasn't worried. I thought we were solid. Sure, we had our arguments now and then. What couple doesn't? Most of the time, it was over stupid things, like me forgetting to take the trash out or her leaving her shoes all over the house. Nothing major. But there's this thing about relationships. They can look fine on the surface while cracks are quietly forming underneath. And if you're not paying attention, those cracks can spread until the whole foundation starts to crumble. I didn't see it coming. Not then, anyway. I thought we were building something strong, something that would last. But sometimes life has a way of showing you just how wrong you are. 2 years ago, our lives got a new character, Jake. Jake moved in next door after the old neighbors, an older couple, downsized and moved to Florida. He was about 28 at the time, younger than most of the folks in the neighborhood. He was a personal trainer, fit, confident, and honestly, a little too good-looking for his own good. He had that kind of physique that made people double-take, like he just stepped out of an action movie. From the second he moved in, Jake was hard not to notice. Not just because of how he looked, but because he was always outside doing something. Washing his car, mowing the lawn, setting up a pull-up bar in his yard. There was always a reason for him to be shirtless. It didn't take long for him to become the talk of the neighborhood. Laura noticed him right away. How could she not? The first time we officially met Jake was when he came over to introduce himself while we were in the yard one Saturday morning. He was friendly, the kind of guy who could charm anyone. Laura struck up a conversation with him almost instantly, asking where he was from, what he did for work, and how he liked the area. I remember standing there, smiling and nodding, barely getting a word in while the two of them chatted like old friends. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Laura was outgoing. She talked to everyone. She'd be just as chatty with the mail carrier or the guy at the hardware store. It didn't occur to me that there was anything different about her interest in Jake. But looking back now, I can see the small shifts that started happening after that. It began with the casual conversations. Whenever Jake was outside, Laura would find a reason to be outside too. At first, it was little things, grabbing the mail, watering the plants, taking out the trash, but somehow, these quick tasks always turned into 10 or 15-minute chats with Jake. One time, I came home from work and found them talking in the driveway. Laura was holding a basket of laundry she'd been taking to the garage, and Jake was leaning casually against his car, laughing at something she said. When I walked up, they both turned to me, and Laura acted like it was no big deal. Jake was just telling me about his new gym equipment, she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. It didn't stop there. A couple of weeks later, Laura decided to bake cookies, something she hadn't done in months. I didn't think much of it until I saw her walking across the yard with a plate of cookies in hand. Just being neighborly, she said when I asked her about it. I shrugged it off. It wasn't unusual for Laura to do things like that. She'd brought brownies to other neighbors before. But then, there was the time she bought a new set of workout clothes, bright, fitted leggings and a matching top. Not the kind of thing she'd normally wear. I asked her about it, and she told me she was thinking about starting to jog again. You know, to get back in shape, she said. I didn't question it. Laura had gone through fitness phases before, where she'd get excited about working out for a month or two and then lose interest. But this time, her timing was convenient. You see, Jake jogged almost every morning. I'd see him out there, earbuds in, running laps around the block. And wouldn't you know it, Laura decided her new jogging routine would start at the exact same time Jake was out there. One morning, I caught them chatting on the sidewalk when I was leaving for work. Laura was stretching, and Jake was showing her some kind of technique to avoid shin splints. I didn't say anything, just gave a small wave and drove off. But something about the scene stuck with me. It was around this time that I started noticing Laura's phone habits changing too. She'd always been glued to her phone, scrolling through social media, texting her friends. But now, she seemed guarded. There were a couple of times I walked into the room, and she'd quickly lock her screen or flip her phone over like she didn't want me to see it. One night, I noticed she was scrolling through Instagram, and when I glanced over, I saw Jake's name at the top of the screen. She quickly swiped past it, but I caught enough to know she was looking at his profile. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off. I was just checking out his fitness posts, she said. He's got some good workout tips. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the little things kept piling up. Another time I was working in the garage when I heard laughter coming from the backyard. I stepped out to see Laura and Jake standing near the fence, laughing about something. Laura was holding a glass of iced tea, and Jake was gesturing animatedly as he told some kind of story. When Laura saw me, she waved like nothing was out of the ordinary. Jake was just telling me about this funny thing that happened at his gym, she said later when I asked her about it. It was starting to feel weird. I don't want to sound paranoid, but you can tell when something's off. There was this new energy in the way Laura talked about Jake. She'd casually mention things he said or did, like Jake's thinking about getting a dog, or Jake recommended this great protein shake. It wasn't what she was saying. It was how she was saying it. And then there were the glances. You know the kind I mean. When we were outside and Jake happened to be around, I'd catch Laura stealing little looks in his direction. It was subtle, but once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. At this point, I still hadn't said anything. Part of me didn't want to believe there was anything to worry about. I trusted Laura. We'd been together for years, and I thought we had a good thing going. But another part of me, the part that couldn't ignore the pattern, was starting to wonder. I decided to keep quiet for now, but I started paying closer attention. If something was happening, I needed to see it for myself. It was a Saturday morning, and I remember it clearly because it started so damn normal. I woke up early, like I usually do, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the news on my phone. Laura was still in bed, which wasn't unusual. She liked her lazy mornings, especially on weekends. The house was quiet, just the sound of the coffee machine humming in the background, and for a moment, I actually felt relaxed. Funny how that works. You think everything's fine because you have no idea what's coming. Laura came into the kitchen about an hour later. She was in her pajamas, hair still messy from sleep, holding her phone in one hand and rubbing her eyes with the other. She sat across from me at the table, and I could tell something was up right away. She had this nervous energy about her, tapping her fingers on the table, glancing at her phone like she was avoiding eye contact. "You okay?" I asked, setting my phone down. She nodded quickly, then shook her head. "Actually, no," she said, letting out a deep breath. "We need to talk." Now anyone who's been in a relationship knows those 4 words rarely mean anything good. My stomach tightened, but I tried to play it cool. "All right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What's going on?" Laura hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I think I have feelings for Jake." For a second, I thought I misheard her. "What?" I asked, leaning forward like getting closer would help the words make more sense. She bit her lip, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, like she needed to get ahead of the backlash. "It just happened. I've been spending time with Jake, and I feel this connection, and now I'm confused." Confused. That word hit me harder than anything else. She didn't just say she felt guilty or that it was a mistake. She said she was confused, like this was some kind of dilemma she needed to figure out. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. My mind was racing. Was she saying she wanted to leave? Was she asking for a divorce? Was she trying to confess and move on? I couldn't tell, and that made it worse. "So, what does this mean?" I asked finally. "Are you saying you're done with us?" Laura shook her head quickly. "No, not necessarily," she said. I don't know what I want right now. I love you, Mike. I do. But I can't stop thinking about him, and I need to figure out what these feelings mean." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. We'd been together for years, built a life together, and now she was telling me she wasn't sure if she wanted to be with me anymore. It was surreal. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "So what are you saying? You want to take a break?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Kind of," she said. "I need time to figure things out. I was thinking, maybe I could take a month to spend some time with Jake and see if there's something real there. If it doesn't work out, then we can focus on us." I blinked, completely stunned by her audacity. "You're serious," I said, not even phrasing it as a question. Laura nodded, her eyes pleading. "I know it sounds crazy, but I don't want to throw away what we have without being sure. I don't want to live with regrets, you know?" Regrets. That word stuck in my head like a splinter. She was talking about regrets like she was the one risking everything, like my feelings were secondary to her figuring out her life. I sat there, staring at her, a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling under the surface. Part of me wanted to blow up, to tell her how selfish she was being. But another part of me, maybe the calmer, more calculating part, decided to stay quiet and let her dig her own hole. "All right," I said finally, leaning back in my chair. Laura blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Wait, really?" "Sure," I said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "If you think that's what you need, go ahead." Her expression shifted, like she wasn't sure if I was being genuine or sarcastic. "I just think it's the best way to figure out where my heart is," she said cautiously. "Sure," I repeated. "Do what you need to do." Inside, I was already done. The second she said she wanted to spend a month with another man, my brain flipped a switch. but I didn't want to show my cards just yet. If she was willing to throw away our marriage for some fantasy with the neighbor, I wanted to see how far she'd take it. Laura let out a relieved sigh, like she'd just been granted permission to do something heroic. Thank you, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I know this is a lot to ask, but I really believe it's the right thing for us. I pulled my hand away, standing up and grabbing my coffee mug. Sure, I said again, my tone flat. If that's what you need. She didn't say anything after that, just sat there, probably processing the fact that I wasn't arguing or putting up a fight. But inside, I was already making plans. Over the next few days, Laura started packing a small bag. She told me she'd be staying with Jake, and she made it sound so casual, like it was just another temporary thing. She didn't even seem to notice that I wasn't asking any questions or putting up any resistance. The day Laura left, the house felt different. Not empty exactly, but quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on my life. I stood in the living room after she walked out, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and I just stared at the door. I thought I'd feel angry or heartbroken, but all I felt was this strange calm, like the weight of pretending everything was okay had finally lifted. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. My wife, someone I'd been with for years, someone I thought I'd grow old with, had left to figure things out with the guy next door. If it weren't my life, I'd have thought it was some ridiculous TV drama. The first few days were strange. I started noticing the little things she'd left behind. Her favorite mug on the kitchen counter, a pair of shoes near the door, a blanket tossed over the back of the couch. I thought about moving them, but then I decided to leave them where they were. Not because I missed her, but because I didn't want to waste the energy. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to fill my time. I stayed late at the office, not because I needed to, but because I didn't want to go home to that empty house. When I wasn't working, I hit the gym, hard. I hadn't been a regular gym goer before, but there was something satisfying about pushing myself physically, like I could sweat out all the frustration I was feeling. Friends started to notice something was off. A couple of them asked why Laura wasn't around, and I gave them vague answers. She's staying with a friend for a bit, I said, trying to sound casual. I wasn't ready to get into the real story yet. My dad was the only person I told the truth to. I called him a few days after Laura left, and the first thing he said was, "What's wrong?" He's always been good at reading me, even over the phone. When I told him what happened, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Well, son, I hate to say it, but it sounds like you're better off without her." At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. I'd expected him to be more upset, or at least ask more questions. But then he said something that stuck with me. "If she doesn't know your worth, why should you wait around for her to figure it out?" He was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make sense of Laura's decision, trying to figure out where I went wrong, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I deserved. I wasn't just some option for her to come back to if her fling with Jake didn't work out. That night, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy in that picture, so sure of our future. But now, it just felt like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. By the end of the week, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Laura to make her grand decision. I was going to make my own. The next day, I called a divorce lawyer. Sitting in that lawyer's office was surreal. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady, even though part of me still couldn't believe it was real. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I talked, and when I was done, he said, "You're well within your rights to file for divorce. This kind of situation falls under irreconcilable differences." Hearing those words made something click in my brain. Irreconcilable differences. That's what we'd become. Laura and I weren't on the same page anymore, and maybe we never had been. The lawyer walked me through the process, explaining what I needed to do and what to expect. By the time I left his office, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I was finally taking control of my own life. Back at home, I started taking small steps to prepare for the inevitable. I moved some money into a separate account, just in case things got messy later. I went through the house and started mentally dividing up what was mine and what was hers. I didn't touch her stuff yet. I figured I'd wait until things were official. But in my mind, I was already making plans for what the house would look like without her. The days turned into weeks, and I started getting used to the quiet. It wasn't as bad as I'd thought it would be. In fact, it felt kind of peaceful. I didn't have to deal with Laura's constant chatter, or the little arguments over stupid things, like whose turn it was to do the dishes. Meanwhile, I started hearing things through the grapevine. A neighbor mentioned seeing Laura and Jake at the park together, looking cozy. Another one said they'd spotted them at a cafe downtown. I nodded and smiled, acting like it didn't bother me. But inside, I felt a mix of anger and pity. Anger because she'd thrown away everything we had for some fling with a guy who probably wouldn't stick around. Pity because I knew it wouldn't end well for her. Jake didn't strike me as the type to settle down, and Laura was going to find that out the hard way. By the third week, I'd stopped checking my phone for messages from Laura. I figured if she wanted to talk, she'd reach out, but I wasn't holding my breath. I was done waiting for her. One night, while I was cleaning out the garage, I found a box of old photos from when Laura and I first got together. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, remembering how happy we'd been back then. But then I thought about all the little red flags I'd ignored over the years, all the times I'd put her needs ahead of mine without even realizing it. I closed the box and pushed it aside. I didn't need those memories. It was almost a full month to the day when Laura decided to make her grand return. I hadn't heard much from her during her little trial with Jake. The few texts she sent were vague at best. Hope you're doing okay, or we'll talk when I'm back. She didn't even try to give me updates or pretend she was torn about her decision. It was like she'd already written me off as plan B. By this point, I'd stopped caring. I wasn't waiting by the door, hoping she'd come to her senses. I wasn't pacing the house, wondering what she and Jake were up to. I'd filed for divorce, and my lawyer had already started drafting the paperwork. As far as I was concerned, the marriage was over. But I didn't tell her that. Not yet. When she walked through the door, it was like nothing had changed. For her, anyway. She had her bag slung over her shoulder, her hair perfectly styled, and this confident look on her face, like she'd just come back from a vacation and expected me to roll out the red carpet. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down by the door. "I'm back." I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, and barely looked up. "Welcome back," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She paused, like she was expecting more of a reaction. When I didn't jump up or ask her how it went, she walked over and sat on the arm of the couch. "We should talk," she said, her voice soft and careful. I muted the TV and turned to face her. "All right," I said, crossing my arms. "Talk." Laura smiled, the kind of smile she used when she was trying to smooth things over. "I've done a lot of thinking," she began, "and I've realized some things about myself, about us, about what I want." I just nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, like she was about to deliver some heartfelt speech. "I care about you, Mike. I really do. And I think we can work through this. I think we can rebuild what we have. Rebuild." She said it like it was as simple as fixing a leaky faucet. I didn't say anything, just kept looking at her, letting her fill the silence. She seemed a little thrown off by my lack of response, but kept going. "Jake's a great guy," she said, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at how casually she brought him up. "But I realized he's not what I need. He's fun, sure, but he's immature. He doesn't have the stability that you have, and I think I was just caught up in the excitement of it all." There it was, her big revelation. She'd tried out the shiny new toy and decided she liked the old one better. "Uh-huh," I said, my voice calm. Laura blinked, like she was expecting more of a reaction. "I know I've hurt you," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. "But I really believe we can get past this. We've been through so much together, Mike. We have history. That's not something you just throw away." I let her finish, let her spill all her carefully rehearsed lines about love and forgiveness, and starting fresh. Then, when she finally stopped talking, I stood up and walked over to the kitchen counter. I opened a drawer, pulled out the stack of divorce papers my lawyer had sent over, and set them on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her smile faltering. "Divorce papers," I said simply. Her face went pale. "You're kidding," she said, letting out a nervous laugh. "Nope," I said, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "I'm not kidding." For a moment, she just stared at the papers, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she looked up at me, her eyes wide. "You're divorcing me?" "Yeah," I said, my tone steady. "I'm not interested in being your second choice, Laura." Her expression shifted from shock to anger in an instant. "Second choice?" she snapped. "That's not what this is. I was confused, Mike. I needed time to figure things out. And in the process, you decided to test the waters with another man," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You left. You walked out on our marriage. And now you're back, because it didn't work out with him. Do you honestly think I'm just going to take you back like nothing happened?" Laura opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, her face turning red. "It's not like that," she said, her voice shaking. "I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to stay and resent you. I thought," she trailed off, her eyes darting around the room. "You thought you could have it both ways," I finished for her. She stood up, crossing her arms. "You're making a mistake, Mike. We can fix this. I know we can." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't let it sway me. I'd already made up my mind. The rest of the conversation was a blur. She tried to argue, to guilt me into changing my mind. She brought up our history, our house, even the idea of starting a family someday. but none of it worked. Eventually, she stormed out of the house. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she'd been, and felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no second thoughts, just relief. Later that night, I called my lawyer to let him know Laura had seen the papers. "How'd she take it?" he asked. "Not great," I said, smirking. "Do you want to give her time to process, or should we move forward?" "Move forward," I said without hesitation. It wasn't easy standing up to Laura like that, but in the end, it was the right thing to do. She'd treated me like an option, like I was just a backup plan in case her fling didn't pan out. And if she thought I was going to accept that, she clearly didn't know me as well as she thought. I knew she wouldn't give up easily. Laura wasn't the type to just walk away from a fight, especially not one where she felt like she was losing. I'd barely had time to sit down when my phone buzzed with a text from her. "This isn't over." I stared at the message for a second before locking my phone and tossing it on the couch. She was right. It wasn't over. Not yet. But it would be soon enough. The next couple of days were eventful, to say the least. Laura showed up unannounced the following evening, banging on the door like she was trying to knock it down. "Mike, open the door!" she yelled. I opened it, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Laura?" She pushed past me, storming into the living room like she still lived here. "We need to talk," she said, pacing back and forth. "You can't just file for divorce without giving me a chance to fix things." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "You had your chance," I said calmly. "You made your decision when you left." "That's not fair," she shot back, her voice rising. "I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to figure things out, to make sure I wasn't making a mistake by staying." I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. "And in doing that, you proved you didn't value what we had. You don't test a marriage by running off to someone else, Laura. That's not how it works." She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes red with frustration. "I was confused," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. I want us, Mike. I want to fix this." "Too late," I said, my tone firm. "You don't get to come back now just because things didn't work out with Jake." Her face twisted with anger, and she pointed a finger at me. "You're being petty," she snapped. "You're throwing away everything we built over one mistake." I shook my head, keeping my composure. "It wasn't just one mistake, Laura. It was a series of choices. You chose to flirt with Jake. You chose to prioritize your feelings for him over our marriage. And then you chose to leave. Those weren't accidents. They were decisions." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she looked defeated. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked quietly. I sighed, feeling a pang of pity for her, even after everything she'd done. "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She stayed for another minute, looking like she wanted to say something else, but eventually she just walked out without another word. The divorce process moved quickly after that. Laura tried to drag things out at first, probably hoping I'd change my mind. She even tried to play the victim with our mutual friends, telling them I was being cold and unforgiving. My dad, on the other hand, was fully on my side. When I updated him on the situation, he let out a low whistle. "She's got some nerve," he said. "But I'm proud of you, son. Standing your ground isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do." Laura's attempts to stall didn't get her very far. My lawyer was sharp, and the evidence of her leaving for Jake made things pretty straightforward. She tried to argue for spousal support, claiming she'd sacrificed her career for the marriage, but the judge didn't buy it. In the end, we reached a fair settlement. She got a small amount of money and some of the furniture she'd picked out, but I kept the house and the majority of my savings. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than I'd expected. The final hearing was bittersweet. Sitting in that courtroom, signing the papers that would officially end our marriage, felt surreal. I glanced over at Laura a couple of times. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Her lawyer handed her a pen, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to sign. But eventually, she scribbled her name at the bottom of the page, sealing the deal. After the hearing, she approached me in the hallway. "Mike," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. For everything." I looked at her, trying to see the person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But all I saw was someone I used to know. "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix this." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out as if to hug me. But I stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Laura," I said, turning and walking away. Every now and then, I'd hear bits and pieces about Laura through the grapevine. Jake had apparently moved on to someone else not long after she came back to me. She was living with a relative now, trying to figure out her next steps, as one mutual friend put it. I didn't feel any satisfaction in hearing about her struggles, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. One day, I ran into her at the grocery store. We locked eyes for a brief moment, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. She gave me a small, awkward wave, but I just nodded and walked past her. There was nothing left to say. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled things. Laura thought she could have it both ways, that she could leave, explore her feelings for someone else, and come back to me when it didn't work out. But life doesn't work like that. I've learned a lot about myself through this process. I know now that I deserve someone who values me, someone who doesn't see me as a fallback option. And if that person is out there, great. If not, that's fine too. For now, I'm just focused on rebuilding my life on my terms. Laura's trial run with Jake may have been her idea of finding clarity, but for me, it was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed.